So with that, I'm going to have Duncan show you a couple of examples of this. And again, please, let's make this as interactive as possible. We'd love to hear some of your questions.
All right, cool. So let's go ahead and jump into some of these examples. And one thing that I will say before we get started is you're going to see a lot of different views here, but I want to just emphasize how flexible SharpCloud is as a platform. There are a number of ways you could set up your story and structure your views so that you can get the type of visual that you're looking for. And we'll show you a couple of examples here today, but just keep in the back of your mind that you can structure this however you see fit. So what we're looking at here is an example SharpCloud story of an innovation roadmap that's specific to the aerospace and defense industry. And what I see here is a landing page, a dashboard that I put together that just gives me some high-level information as to what the key views in this story are going to be, and gives me a little bit of context to what I'm going to be looking at. So let's go ahead and jump into one of these views and take a look at our strategic landscape here. So what I see here is the 8 goals that we are working towards as an organization. So I can see those here. But now what I can start to do is introduce other types of information into my strategic landscape here. So for example, what are the elements of the aircraft that we're looking to innovate on? What are the technologies that we're developing to help support those innovations? And what are the partners that we're leveraging in the development of those technologies? And then lastly, what are the risks that we've identified that could impact our overall business? So being able to see all of this information in one place is really powerful. But the real power comes from being able to see how all of these elements are connected to one another. So I can turn on these relationships, and now I'm presented with a really complex web of relationship lines, which just kind of demonstrates how complex this landscape can get. Now, what I'm able to do from here is start to focus in on any element of this roadmap and look at what the dependencies and relationships are across my entire landscape so that I know what I need to take into consideration when making a strategic decision. So for example, let's take a look at these different aircraft elements that we've outlined here. And let's go ahead and select reduce net carbon content as a strategy that we're looking to execute on. What I'm able to do is I'm able to select this item and focus in and filter out all the noise and see my strategic landscape from the point of view of this strategy. So now I have a really clear picture as to what are the goals are that this strategy will help us meet, how much needs to be invested across all of these different technologies that are playing a key role in reducing our net carbon content, and then also what are the partners that are going to be involved that we need to kind of keep into the loop and keep informed as well. And I can see that in this case, one of my partners, Global Aerosystems, has a connection to multiple technologies that we've identified as being key to reducing our net carbon content. And those are the blended winglet and the hybrid wing body. So I can now take this information and focus in on some of these technologies maybe in more detail to understand how they're being developed and how that kind of relates to our overall plan in terms of executing on reducing our net carbon content.
And I think this is critical, right? Because think of how many times, I would say, with all the aerospace and defense companies that we're working with all over the world, you have typically some type of spreadsheet that captures all these different elements. Maybe there's an element of cost associated with it. But in order to see how things are related, then typically there are PowerPoints done that show a static relationship to some of these items, but you'd need 100 to 200 slides to show every common denomination of what's connected to what, or you're just getting back to someone saying, well, we're not sure of how this relationship affects this particular area. So being able to follow the thread, which is what Duncan is going to show you right now, I think is critical in making sure that your own digital thread strategic roadmap gives you the visibility across all these different influences. So let's show an example of that, Duncan.
Sure. So what I'm going to do now is take this kind of insight that I've gathered from this landscape view, and I'm going to jump now to a specific radar view that just focuses in on a subset of those items. So in this case, I'm looking at all of my technologies. I've broken them out into this radar so I can see the different types of technologies that we're developing. We can see those by the different segments here, our new technology, structural concepts, aviation materials, et cetera. And then these different rings represent the time horizon that we're going to be developing these technologies. So we can see what we're going to be developing in the short term, medium, and long term. Now, one thing you'll notice at the bottom of the screen here is I've also included some interactive filters. And what this allows me to do is I can actually filter by any of those aircraft elements, those different strategies that we were talking about on the last view. So we identified reducing our net carbon content as a strategy that we're looking to execute on. So I'm actually able to filter this radar by those relationships that we created in the last view. And this really is really emphasizes how those relationships, they're more than just lines between boxes. They're actual data points that you can use in various ways throughout the story, like filtering, as we can see here. So in this case, I have a really good picture now of all the technologies that we're developing for that reducing net carbon content strategy. And one thing that I notice here is that one of these technologies is in the outermost ring. So this is in more of our long-term plan. But if we're looking to execute on that strategy in the short or medium term, we might need to make some changes to our development timeline. So again, I can now take this information and take it to another view where I look at a more specific timeline of how these technologies are being developed and maybe how they're relating to some of those partners that we identified before. So let's go ahead and jump to a timeline view here. So again, I'm looking at those technologies, which we can see on the timeline here, but in slightly different contexts where we can see the start and end dates. And one thing that you'll also notice is that I've reintroduced those partner organizations up in what we call the tray. And this allows me to still see the relationships between what we have in the timeline and some of those kind of higher level influences, in this case, our partners. So again, I could filter by using these interactive filters down here by strategy, but I remember from that first view that we identified Global Aerosystems as a key partner playing a role in a number of those technologies for that strategy that we picked. So let's go ahead and filter the timeline view based on that. And when I do that, I can see that this Global Aerosystems partner actually has a stake in a number of the technologies that are currently being developed. But if I look down at the bottom here, we can see that hybrid wing body technologies, that was part of our long-term plan, hasn't begun development yet, and it's actually not planned to be started until midway through next year. So what I might want to do now is drill down on this item to find out a little more information about it. And you can do that for any item in this story just by clicking this button here and drilling down and expanding it to see some of these panels that I've set up here. You can have as many of these panels as you want that shows you different types of information. In this case, I have one that shows me a brief description. I can see some specific attributes for this technology. I can see some slides that a team member has put together and uploaded, an embedded video. I can also see all of the links to other items in my roadmap, so I know exactly what's going to be impacted by this hybrid wing body technology. And I've attached some resources, some documents and links to other systems that the user can navigate to or download. But in this case, I'm concerned with this attributes panel because this is showing me some of the specific attributes or metrics for this technology. And when I look at this panel, I can see that the hybrid wing body has a technology readiness level of 3, and it's in the proof of concept stage. So I know it's probably fairly immature in our pipeline, but what I can do now is jump to another view that shows me that development, that TRL pipeline in more detail and allows me to understand how this technology relates to some of the others that we're developing. So let's go ahead and jump to that view here. So again, looking at these same technologies, but in a slightly different context. In the bottom, we can see all of the different individual stages of our technology readiness level pipeline. But on the y-axis here on the left-hand side, I can also see the current status. So I know exactly how these technologies are developing. And if I focus in on hybrid wing body here, I can see it's at stage 3, like we previously saw in the panel. But if I drill down, I can see it's actually behind schedule as well. And I can see that actually a number of these technologies that have a relationship to that partner, which we identified, Global Aerosystems, are also behind schedule. So maybe I need to reach out and contact our partner and see if we can reprioritize some of these technologies, not only just to get them back on schedule, but to enable us to execute on that strategy that we identified before. Because that really allows me to focus in on the work that really matters. I don't have to, if I'm presenting to this partner, I don't have to create tons of different slides and presentations, because I can do that all within the tool, either jumping between the views like we've been doing today, or I could set up a pre-configured presentation, which I've actually already done. And I actually did this last year. We can see that I did this in Q3 of last year. So what's really powerful about these SharpCloud presentations is you just have to create them once, and then you can keep updating the underlying SharpCloud data, and that will update your presentation as well. So to demonstrate this, I'm just going to accelerate this hybrid wing body technology through our pipeline, and we'll say it's at stage 8 and it's actually ahead of schedule. So I've changed some of the underlying data for our technologies. Now, if I go ahead and play this presentation and flick to the next view here, I can see that change reflected in my presentation as well. So I can see hybrid wing bodies ahead of schedule, and it's in system qualified stage 8 of our TRL pipeline. So not only are these presentations dynamic in the sense that they stay up to date, but I can interact with these presentations just as I was if I was jumping between the different views like I have been up to this point. So if someone has a question around what are we doing to reduce our non-CO2 emissions, I can focus in on this during the presentation so I can really let the conversation that we're having drive the presentation that I'm giving.
That is phenomenal. So I want to take a break there to allow everyone to kind of absorb that. I want to see if anybody has any questions. And I guess I'll start off with just one, which is, typically a lot of these organizations, when they see this, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. How am I ever going to get started? So how do people normally bring in the roadmaps that they have currently into something like SharpCloud? And I guess what are some of the options with that?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that you can get started building a story inside of SharpCloud. One way is just making changes on the front end in the actual tool, kind of like I've been doing. You can enter in new items just by double clicking on the view or use forms and have people enter in their information directly into the tool. But a lot of times I find that when I'm working with customers, they'll have some of this data in an Excel spreadsheet already. And it's incredibly easy to just kind of copy and paste that data into SharpCloud and then build a story that has the same structure as your Excel spreadsheet in terms of the data that you're going to be working with. And then obviously you can go and create the views inside of SharpCloud to visualize that data in a way that makes sense for you and your organization and answers the questions that you have. But we also have some really robust database connection tools as well that let you connect to something like Jira, Microsoft Project, SharePoint lists, and bring in that data, not just dynamically into the tool, but also push some of those updates back into the tool as well, into the other tool that the data is coming from. So there are a number of different ways that you can get started and you can get data into the tool. It really just depends on the level of connectivity that you need.
Okay. I don't see any other questions right now. Again, if you have any other questions, just put them in the chat. I guess another thing that I think that is really important is that while we're showing a use case here around, let's say, innovation roadmap, product roadmap, however you'd like to describe it, if you're considering around a digital thread, there has to be elements of risk that you need to consider in order to make sure that you've mitigated them. And again, you're focusing on the items that are going to give you really the most bang for your buck. So while this is one use case, can you show another use case? Because I think that's where people get a lot of the benefit out of SharpCloud. It's a multi-use case tool. How would someone want to use this if it came to visualizing some of their risk?
Yeah, so risk is another really common use case for SharpCloud. And I think one thing that's really nice about this example is it ties together a lot of different use cases that are typically done in a really siloed environment. So if I jump to the next view here, and I can also demonstrate forms like we've been talking about, kind of creating data inside the tool here as well. What I'm outlining here are all the risks that we've currently identified. So this could be its own separate story and its own separate use case. But in this case, I'm going to show how you can integrate it into your roadmap. So what we're looking at here are the 6 risks that we've currently identified. And we can see that they're ordered by their overall risk rating. And that risk rating is a calculated value based on some information that I have in this form on the right-hand side. So forms are a way for you to really easily collect information from a user, and they don't even necessarily have to have a SharpCloud license for you to do this. So me as the administrator, I can set up the form and outline the criteria that I'm looking for users to enter when they're giving me information about the risk in this case, and I can then send this form to them either through a URL or have them scan a QR code and use it on their phone, or enter it directly into the story like I'm going to do here. So let's go ahead and fill out this form and say that we've identified a new risk around competitor innovation. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that in here. And let's go ahead and fill out some of this information around the probability of this risk coming to fruition. So we'll say it's actually a high probability that our competitors are innovating in this space, and the impact is going to be medium. We'll say that we haven't addressed this risk yet, and I can actually create some of those relationships either to other risks in the story or to some of the other elements like the technologies that we've been talking about here. So I can go ahead and enter all of that into the form here, and then just hit submit, and that'll create a new SharpCloud item that represents that risk of competitor innovation in my story. And that'll then kind of flow in here onto the screen here in a second. And then I'll be able to start analyzing this risk in different ways throughout the story. So let's go ahead and jump to the next view here, where I can see, I'm just going to jump back and just make sure that that was entered in here correctly. Bear with me one second. go ahead and make sure that everything's get entered here. Okay, and we'll enter that. So after that form gets submitted, again, it'll create a new item in our story here for competitor innovation. And then I can jump to the next view here where I can start analyzing that based on the metrics that I entered in on that form. So in this case, we're analyzing the probability and the impact, those kind of two key attributes that are determining the overall risk rating for competitor innovation. So I can see that based on the probability of medium and the impact of medium, it's been assigned a rating of low. And it's really, because of how I've set up this view and it's color-coded based on their ratings, it's easier for me to know where I need to kind of devote my attention. In this case, I only have one high risk rating, and that's around supply chain disruption. But because I'm doing this type of work in SharpCloud, and I've created this view, and because SharpCloud is such a dynamic tool, I can, like with any item in the story, drill down into it and see some of that underlying information. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and drill down into one of my risks here that's a little bit more mature that I've built out some more information around. And we can see that when I do that here, I actually have an embedded risk flight path view for this risk, which allows me to see what was the inherent risk that we started out with, and then what's the residual risk going to be when we ultimately get it down to a risk level that's more manageable. So I can kind of see how this risk is maturing and progressing alongside some of these other attribute panels and relationship and resource panels as well. So you can control the different types of panels that you have here based on the type of item that you're drilling down into. So what I'm going to do now is show you how this risk kind of ties back into that overall strategy that we've been talking about. And if we remember back to that form that I created here, we created some relationships to some of those other items in our story around our technologies and some of the other risks. So we really just created a single data point. But because we've been doing some of that other work around our innovation roadmaps inside of SharpCloud, it's easy to then integrate it and quickly and easily see how that new risk that we just captured ties back into our overall strategy. So I'll reintroduce all these items and turn on the relationships, and then I can select competitor innovation here and see exactly what that is going to impact in terms of the technologies we're developing, the aircraft elements that we're looking to improve, and ultimately what goals we're going to be able to execute on.
That is awesome. Something else to really keep in mind is that while you can have multiple use cases really within SharpCloud, we just showed you a couple of them. You can do it for portfolio management, stakeholder mapping. You also have the ability, we're working with a number of aerospace and defense companies that have a number of different types of innovation roadmaps, right? So maybe one is across quantum, cognitive systems, thermal, space battlefield, right? So imagine having all these individual roadmaps, but we also have the ability to kind of tie them all together to make an enterprise roadmap, right? So there could be senior level management who need to see across all those different strategic roadmaps. So while we didn't show that to you here, you do have the ability to kind of roll those things up, which becomes very, very powerful. So you can see the connections across multiple roadmaps to some of those common influences, like let's say the strategic goals of an organization. We do have a couple moments left. I don't see any questions. So very quickly, Duncan, you mentioned in the beginning that, this can be designed in almost any way because it is a platform. Very quickly, do you have a couple other views you can show that just show something completely different from a SharpCloud standpoint?
Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into one more story here. And this is actually around a program portfolio. So as you can see here, this is a completely different story, and I've structured a different type of dashboard that gives me different types of information. I still have links to some of the other views in this story, but in this case, I've also included some high-level budget information. That's a dynamic calculation. We can see that down here across the bottom, as well as an embedded view that gives me some information around how our programs are being kind of spread across these different departments and how much revenue we can expect from those. We can see that in this interactive chart here. But one other view that I did want to really quickly show you is this landscape view, because this just, I think, demonstrates how different you can structure a lot of these views to communicate the same underlying data in different ways. So in this case, I plotted some of those key programs from across our different departments onto an infographic of our organization, which allows me to then share this with everybody and allow people to see what are the key activities that are going on across the entire business. So if I want to see what the marketing team is working on, I just have to filter down to see those items, and then I can quickly and easily drill down and see, in this case, what's the new marketing strategy going to be? I can get a really brief description here, or of course, drill down and see all of that underlying information, like the program details, when can we expect these milestones to be hit, or some of the more specific information to the marketing plan that we can see here, like the web traffic and some analytics around that. So I think this just kind of goes to show, and again, we're just kind of scratching the surface in terms of how you can lay out a bunch of these stories, but it really is down to what you need to see and the type of visualization that you're looking to get, and we can likely support that.
Yeah, that is terrific. So thank you everyone for your time. We would love to see if anybody has any questions, as you reflect upon your own business, especially in the aerospace and defense world, knowing how much different influences should be driving within your own digital thread, all those different, areas that you need to consider, from goals, partners, technologies, clean energy initiatives, being able to dynamically see the visualization, being able to follow that thread on how things are connected are a big reason why we have a lot of companies making this investment. Well, thank you everyone from around the world joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thank you for attending. We really appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.